Madam Speaker, it's my pleasure to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Minnesota, the chief sponsor of this legislation, Congressman Paulsen.
Gentleman from Minnesota, recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the gentleman for yielding and for his leadership as chair of the committee. You know, members, it is really easy and comfortable to think that human trafficking or sex trafficking only happens outside of the United States. And the truth is, it's happening right here in our own communities and right in our own backyards. Recently, I had the opportunity to talk to a girl named Diana. And Diana tells me the story how she's the oldest in a family of a single mother with brothers and sisters. And her mother had no interest in caring, giving her love and attention, or her siblings. So Deanna's looking for love and attention, and she is seduced by a man who promises to treat her and respect her the way she deserves. He even called himself her boyfriend. Well, at age 13, within days of running away, Diana finds herself in Philadelphia, in Chicago, being trafficked and separated from her family. And sadly, this is happening to too many young girls in America. And I use the word girls for a reason. The majority of these victims are not old enough to have graduated from high school. They're not old enough to have voted in an election. They're not even old enough to have passed their driver's test, because we're talking about 12 and 13 and 14-year-old girls. Those most at risk of victimization are the vulnerable. They're lured under the false promise of better lives, and then they're forced into prostitution. These girls are victims, and they should be treated as victims so that they come out of the shadows. Because right now they fear coming out of the shadows because they view their trafficker as the only means of survival, or they fear retribution. They don't feel they can trust law enforcement because most states say they should be incarcerated instead of being treated as a victim. And one of the best ways to help these young girls is to remove the fear of prosecution and provide an avenue for them to escape and then get the services they need, to get the counseling they need. And that's what the Stop Exploitation Through Trafficking Act does, is it incentivizes states to adopt those safe harbor laws that have worked in other states. This is not only the right thing to do to help these girls, but many in law enforcement will also tell you that treating them as victims makes them more likely to assist in investigations, resulting in longer sentences for the traffickers and the bad guys. Now, while there are many issues that divide us here in Washington, this is an area where there's agreement, there's bipartisan and bicameral work being done. I really want to thank my colleague Gwen Moore from Wisconsin for her work on this legislation. I want to thank Louise Slaughter for her work on other legislation. I want to thank Senator Klobuchar in the Senate for helping move this legislation forward. And I also want to commend all the members that are working on these 5 bills that we'll be voting on later today. Now, most importantly, I also want to thank law enforcement and victims advocates who worked with us to share their thoughts, to share their expertise. This isn't a problem that's going to be solved by one group working alone. It's going to take all of us working together, learning from each other, coordinating efforts, and then coming together as a community. This legislation, by the way, is endorsed by the National Fraternal Order of Police, the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, and the National Center for Exploited Children. And, Madam Speaker, I'd like to enter, for the record, several letters of endorsement for this legislation.
Without objection.
Members, this is an opportunity to save lives and give hopes to thousands of sex trafficking victims in America. There is more work to be done, and working together we can put an end to sex trafficking. I yield back the balance.